Proxy wars have long served as a means for major powers to influence global geopolitics without direct confrontation. The Korean War, 1950 to 1953, and the Syrian Civil War, 2011-present, offer prime examples, showcasing how global players manipulate regional conflicts to further their agendas. Historical background: Cold War of Arab Spring. The Korean War erupted when North Korea, backed by the Soviet Union and China, invaded South Korea, which was supported by the United States and other Western nations. It became a flashpoint for Cold War tensions, with both sides unwilling to let the other gain strategic ground. This led to a brutal three-year conflict that ended in a stalemate. In contrast, the Syrian Civil War began as a series of peaceful protests during the Arab Spring in 2011. It quickly escalated into a full-blown war when President Bashar al-Assad's regime responded with severe crackdowns, drawing in various domestic and international actors. Unlike the Korean conflict, Syria's war involved a complex mix of local, regional, and international dynamics, with sectarian, political, and ideological divides fueling the prolonged battle. Foreign involvement: a global chessboard. The Korean War was a classic example of Cold War-era proxy warfare, with clear lines drawn between the Communist bloc, Soviet Union and China, and the capitalist West, United States and its allies. The U.S. led a United Nations coalition that directly engaged in combat operations to repel North Korean forces, while China provided massive military support to North Korea, including volunteer troops. In contrast, the Syrian Civil War became a more fragmented and multifaceted conflict. Russia and Iran heavily supported the Assad regime through military aid, funding, and direct intervention. On the other side, the U.S., Turkey, and several Gulf states backed various opposition groups. The involvement of Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant added another layer of complexity, leading to a situation where traditional alliances were blurred. This engagement by multiple actors turned Syria into a modern-day battleground for competing geopolitical interests, often at the expense of the Syrian people. Chemical warfare, a grim reality. While the Korean War was notorious for its conventional warfare and high casualties, it did not see the widespread use of chemical weapons. The Syrian Civil War, however, has been repeatedly marked by the use of chemical agents like sarin and chlorine. Despite international efforts to ban such weapons, reports and investigations by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons indicate that the Syrian government used chemical agents against civilians, a blatant violation of international law. Inspections were frequently hampered by security concerns, and Syria's alleged switch to using crude chlorine bombs showed a shift in tactics aimed at instilling terror and gaining military advantage. These actions highlighted the horrors of modern proxy wars, where international norms are flouted, and global powers often find themselves in a moral and strategic quagmire. Human cost: tragedy in numbers. The human cost of proxy wars is staggering. The Korean War left an indelible scar on the Korean Peninsula, with an estimated 2.5 million military and civilian casualties. Cities were leveled, and countless families were torn apart, leaving a legacy of pain and division that persists to this day. Similarly, the Syrian Civil War has caused an enormous humanitarian crisis. Over 500,000 people have been killed, with millions more displaced internally and externally. This widespread devastation has led to the largest refugee crisis since World War II, straining international aid efforts and creating long-term socio-economic challenges in host countries. In both cases, the civilian populations suffered immensely, serving as stark reminders of the human cost of geopolitical ambitions. Media and information warfare. During the Korean War, the primary sources of information were newspapers, radio broadcasts, and limited television coverage, often subject to heavy censorship. This created a narrow, controlled narrative that allowed governments to influence public opinion. In contrast, the Syrian Civil War unfolded in an era of 24/7 news cycles and social media, where information and disinformation spread rapidly. Activists, journalists, and ordinary citizens on the ground provided real-time updates, often using smartphones and social media platforms to document the conflict. This unprecedented flow of information also gave rise to propaganda and misinformation campaigns by various state and non-state actors. The media became a battlefield in its own right, with competing narratives vying to shape international perception and policy. Geopolitical outcomes: a divided legacy. The Korean War ended in 1953 with an armistice, not a peace treaty, leaving North and South Korea technically still at war. The demilitarized zone stands as one of the most fortified borders in the world, symbolizing the deep ideological divide between the communist North and the capitalist South. The conflict cemented the U.S.-South Korea alliance and solidified North Korea's relationship with China, setting the stage for ongoing regional tension. In Syria, despite numerous attempts at ceasefires and peace talks, the war continues with no definitive end in sight. The country remains fractured along ethnic, sectarian, and political lines, with the Assad regime holding power over much of the territory. The war has fundamentally altered Syria's geopolitical landscape, serving as a focal point for regional and global power struggles that continue to reverberate through the Middle East. Regional power play, Cold War echoes. Regional powers have always seen proxy wars as opportunities to extend their influence without direct military engagement. In Korea, China and the Soviet Union viewed the war as a means to challenge U.S. dominance in Asia. China's intervention in 1950 was a clear signal of its determination to protect its sphere of influence. The Syrian Civil War similarly saw regional players like Iran, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia using the conflict to pursue their strategic interests. Iran's support for Assad is driven by its desire to maintain a Shiite axis of power stretching from Tehran to Beirut, while Turkey's involvement is shaped by its concerns over Kurdish separatism and influence. Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states have sought to counter Iranian influence by supporting Sunni rebel groups. These regional dynamics have made the conflict more intractable and violent. Global repercussions, refugee crisis, and humanitarian issues. The Korean War displaced millions, resulting in a divided peninsula where families were separated for decades. Refugee camps and the dire humanitarian situation in both Koreas drew limited international attention due to the geopolitical focus on the Cold War. The Syrian Civil War has had a far-reaching impact, resulting in one of the largest humanitarian crises in modern history. Over 6 million Syrians are internally displaced, and another 5.6 million have fled the country, seeking asylum in neighboring countries and Europe. This mass exodus has strained resources and sparked political debates over immigration and asylum policies, particularly in Europe. The Syrian refugee crisis has become a global issue, highlighting the profound consequences of proxy wars that extend far beyond their immediate regions. Diplomatic challenges. UN's role. In the Korean War, the United Nations played a direct military role, with US-led forces fighting under the UN flag to repel North Korean aggression. This was made possible by the Soviet Union's boycott of the UN Security Council at the time. In Syria, the UN has been primarily involved in humanitarian aid and diplomatic efforts to broker peace. However, attempts to pass resolutions condemning the Assad regime or imposing sanctions have been repeatedly blocked in the Security Council, mainly by Russia and China. This deadlock illustrates the limitations of international diplomacy in proxy wars, where the interests of major powers often lead to a paralysis in decision-making, allowing conflicts to persist. Evolving warfare, from conventional to hybrid. The Korean War was characterized by conventional military tactics, including large-scale battles, tank warfare, and aerial dogfights. It involved mass mobilizations and set the stage for future Cold War confrontations. The Syrian Civil War, however, has been a textbook example of hybrid warfare, combining traditional military operations with guerrilla tactics, terrorism, and information warfare. The conflict saw the rise of non-state actors like ISIS, complicating the battlefield with multiple factions fighting for control. The use of proxy militias, such as Iranian-backed Hezbollah fighters and Kurdish forces, demonstrated how states now employ indirect means to project power. This shift reflects the changing nature of warfare, where states prefer covered, cost-effective strategies over direct military confrontation. Thanks for sticking around until the end of this deep dive into proxy wars and their impact on global politics. If you found this video informative, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more engaging content like this. Make sure to tap the notification bell so you never miss out on our latest videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.